Please be advised that by registering and/or entering the events area, you consent to your voice, name, and/or likeness being used without compensation in photos, films, and any media, whether now known or thereafter devised for eternity. This content may be used for future promotional purposes or shared on social media outlets. You release the Federal City Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, its successors, assigns, and licenses from any liability whatsoever of any nature. If you do not wish to be subject to these conditions, do not register and/or enter the event area. You may also choose to keep your camera off and remain on mute. Thank you for your cooperation.
Good evening and welcome to the Mind Your Health, Mental and Emotional Wellness Across the Lifespan webinar. We are so happy that you are able to join us this evening. I'm Freddie Brown, one of the co-chairs of the Physical and Mental Health Committee. Before we begin, it is my pleasure to bring to you our wonderful chapter president, Sora Tony McIntosh Hopper, to begin with some greetings and words of welcome. Madam President.
Good evening and welcome to the Federal City Alumni Chapter's Mind Your Health, Mental and Emotional Wellness Across the Lifespan program. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and many are suffering from the effects of a pandemic, loss of family members and friends, multiple news stories of police brutality, civil unrest, and a temporary gas shortage. It is hard enough just living for many of us, especially Black people, and discussing our mental health is often not prioritized. We are grateful that you are joining us this evening for a candid conversation on mental and emotional well-being. This evening, you will hear from a mental health professional and two advocates who will discuss the range of mental and emotional challenges a person may face across their lifespan. And then we will hear from a music consultant on the connection between music and self-care. Thank you for being with us this evening. And now I'm giving the mic back to the Physical and Mental Health co-chairs, Freddie Brown and Wendy Penn.
For those of you who are just joining, I'm Freddie Brown, one of the co-chairs of the Physical and Mental Health Committee.
And hello, I am Wendy Penn, the other co-chair.
It is with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Samantha Goburn, an integrative psychotherapist who is known for having a sincere, relaxed, and comfortable approach towards counseling. As a licensed independent clinical social worker, she provides individual, family, and group therapy to both adolescent and adult populations. Samantha has over 20 years of experience in the social sciences and employs cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and other evidence-based practice techniques to meet the unique needs of her clients. Her practice focus includes depression, anxiety, trauma, adjustment disorders, interpersonal relationships, and work with fragile families. Ms. Goburn is a PhD candidate in social work at Whitney University. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Mass Media Communications from the University of the District of Columbia and her Master's of Science in Social Work from Columbia University. Ms. Goburn is the Chief Executive Officer of Goburn Behavioral Health and Counseling, PLLC, in the District of Columbia. Samantha is a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and was initiated at my home chapter, Beta Iota Chapter.
Great, thank you for that, Freddie. I would like to introduce to you Shadeen Holmes. Shadeen is a Philadelphia native, an entrepreneur and wellness advocate. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in English from West Chester University of Pennsylvania and a Master's of Science in Education from Johns Hopkins University School of Education. She is a certified early childhood special educator and specializes in early childhood literacy development and foundational learning skills. During the pandemic, Shadeen launched Lotus Tutoring Service, LLC, a Philadelphia-based tutoring service which offers homeschooling, virtual school support, and tutoring services for early learners between the ages of 4 and 10, both in person and virtually. The overall mission of Lotus Tutoring Service, LLC, is to shrink the academic achievement gap in inner city communities by providing support services beyond the classroom in the areas of reading, writing, and foundational literacy with an emphasis on social and emotional development. As Shadeen continues to expand her business, it is her hope that her academic accomplishments, in combination with her own personal experience, can and will create an atmosphere of hope, encouragement, and empowerment for young people. She aims to become a pillar in her community by promoting academic achievement among her students, mental health awareness for young adults and millennials, and the significance of personal development in urban communities. We also welcome Ryan Williams. Ryan has spent more than a decade as an advocate for mental health. After experiencing a personal tragedy, Ryan used the transformative power of serving others to heal and reinvent himself, finding purpose in life and work. Ryan has dedicated his personal time to teaching classes on behalf of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, leading fundraisers in support of mental health services, volunteering with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and serving as a mentor to people in their mental health journeys. His primary goal is to plant a seed of belief that creating a satisfying life with mental health difficulties can be achieved with understanding, support, resources, and accommodations. First, Ms. Goborn will set the tone by talking to us about what mental health is, dispelling myths about mental health, and sharing what mental and emotional wellness looks like across the lifespan. Then she will invite Shadeen and Ryan to join her for a conversation about their mental and emotional health journeys. Following their conversation, we will introduce you to our fourth speaker. Now, Sora Samantha, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Sora, and thank you for Soros for having me. And good evening to everybody who is viewing. I'm going to start out by just talking a little bit about what mental health is by giving examples of what mental health is not. And I'm going to do that because we have two courageous panelists who are really going to give you the landscape of what mental health can look like. So just to begin, mental health includes your emotional, your psychological, and your social well-being. It can be impacted by biological factors, familial factors, life experiences. But what it isn't, it is not just, it's not gender specific. Anybody can suffer a mental health illness. And it's actually the most common health condition in the United States. And more than 50% of people will be diagnosed with a mental health illness or disorder at some point in their lifetime. I'd like to also dispel the fact that mental health just happens to adults. It also happens in children. It's across the lifespan. Some early warning signs, just to give you some insight, is a person eating too much or sleeping too much or smoking, drinking, high-risk behavior, high-risk sexual behaviors, having persistent thoughts and memories you can't get out of your head. People like to say it's just limited to anxiety or depression or suicidal ideations. That's actually a manifestation of of mental health, but that's not mental health. So it doesn't necessarily look like one thing, and it looks like many different things depending on, what your experience is. Again, it could be smoking, drinking, pulling away from people, being in isolation. So just those are some of the things that you can look for. Mental health is not also just limited to people who are homeless and who have violent tendencies. Actually, the research shows that it's just between 3 to 5% of people who are diagnosed with mental health disorders that are really actually violent. So there's really not any difference between someone who has a diagnosis and someone who doesn't. Also, people with a mental health condition, they can work. There's a myth that, they're not stable, they're not able to function. And so, yes, in some cases, people may have issues with activities of daily living, like getting out of bed or bathing or eating or things of that nature, but it does not necessarily mean that a person cannot function. On the contrary, I think, and just in my course of practice, mental health, it's everybody in your neighborhood. It can look like anybody, male, female, it does not matter. And 9 times out of 10, you really won't know what's happening with a person because people like to suffer in silence, unfortunately. So I'm really glad that we're having this panel. I'm really happy to be facilitating this discussion with Ryan and Shadeen, because a lot of people will hear from a mental health expert, but it's very, very rare that you're going to hear from people who are going to tell their personal stories. And so I'd like to think that they are actually the stars of this show, sharing the journey of what mental health can look like across the span. So again, I can give you statistics. I can talk a lot about what I see in my practice, but I think the real stories, the lived experience, what happens to a person in their conscious state carries a lot more meaning. In particular for Black and Brown people. That is one of the things that I really, I think mental health is for everybody, but as an Afro-Latina, I know firsthand that it is in our communities something that we don't like to talk about, or we think that we have to choose religion over mental health. And you can have both. You don't have to pick one over the other. So again, I'm just really glad to be facilitating this discussion. I'm not going to take up too much of the time because I think that the story really needs to come from Ryan and Shadeen. And it's probably just a lot more interesting than statistics that I can offer you. And we can take it from there. Wendy?
Okay, great. So there was, did you want to share the statistics from the next slide, or do you want to just go ahead and invite Ryan and Shadeen?
Oh, we can share it if you'd like me to. That's fine.
Okay, maybe if you could just so people can kind of put it into context. You did share a little bit about how pervasive it can be without people realizing it, but if we want to touch on that, and then we can have Ryan and Shadeen join you.
Okay. Well, 20.6% of US adults experienced mental illness in 2019, and that's according to SAMHSA. That's about 51.5 million people. Now, here's the thing. We're just talking about statistics in the United States, but what we know, as evidenced by COVID, let's say, mental health is across not just the lifespan, but it's worldwide. It's not unique to the United States. So if we look at that number, about 51.5 million people, just think about the people outside of the United States. It's an epidemic. And so we really need to take these numbers seriously. And again, although it represents 1 in 5 adults, it's not limited to adults. It can be children, it could be young adults, emerging adults as they transition in their phase of life into adulthood. 13.1 million people experience serious mental health. So that's a little bit more escalated. And they can be hospitalized, they can be a danger to themselves, they can be a danger to others around them. So again, those are just, we didn't want to bombard you with statistics, but it is a number to really consider and to really take serious, and not just here in the United States, but just worldwide. Again, mental health doesn't look like one thing. It's not specific to gender. It's not specific to ethnicity or race. It can happen to anybody at any point in time. And my hope is that through this conversation, we can really normalize it, because people will, anybody can be impacted.
Great, thank you. So Ryan and Shadeen, I think you two should be unmuted now, and you can move forward with the conversation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First, I just want to say thank you to Freddie and Wendy for the opportunity to be here and say hello to everybody. I'm just super grateful to be on this call and share my personal experiences with the listeners, because it has definitely been a journey. Definitely has been a journey for me.
Well, Shadeen, here's what I'm going to do. I did a coin course, coin toss on behalf of you and Ryan, since we're virtual. And so you won the coin toss, right? How would you describe your journey to wellness? Let's start there. And please feel free to share at your pace, because recognizing that this is a sensitive topic, again, I really respect you guys and what you're doing here today.
The irony of me having the coin toss is just crazy.
Yeah.
But it has definitely been a journey. I would say my journey to wellness started like back in 2018. After I graduated from Westchester in May of 2017, I relocated to DC, where I started a very intense teacher preparation program. And I was like going to class all day. I was working, teaching all day, and then going to class all evening. So it was like rinse, wash, repeat. Rinse, wash, repeat, class, work. And so I think the end of my first year, I decided to get a trainer, because I saw like my first class picture and I'm like, who is this person? What? So I decided to get a trainer, and I was just working on my, my physical stuff. And then a year later, I had got to a place where emotionally I just wasn't there. And I was able to identify that because of my background in education. Like my teacher, Johns Hopkins really had like emphasis on social emotional with children, being able to identify trauma in children, being able to identify when children are showing up in a classroom with something going on. So I had got to a place where I was like, I don't know, like what's happening. So I was talking to my friends, and I'm just like, at the time I had gotten into a really like toxic relationship, and I was just on a whirlwind. And I was working in a really high stress school in DC. Like the population I was working in was really, really intense. So like that was taking a toll on my mental, like the stress level of working in the classroom and the workload of being a teacher, all the while still being in grad school. So I'm working all day at school, 7:30 to 3:30, and then I'm going to class 5:30 to 8, Monday through Thursday. Friday and Saturday, I'm working on the assignments that I didn't have, all the while also my social life is like drowning. So that got me to, after talking to my friends who are really objective and my mentors and my coaches and things, I had decided myself, maybe I'm gonna go to therapy. And I would just take this time to shout out my therapist, who is Samantha Goburn. She has been like my mentor in my journey. So I called her, she had like a consultation, and she was like, so why are you thinking about going to therapy? And I'm like, well, I started working on myself. I got a trainer, and it was like my physical stuff. And then I'm like kind of here to work on my emotional stuff. And she got me all the way together right there in that 15-minute consultation. She was just like, therapy is about work. And if you're not ready to work, then don't waste your time and don't waste mine either. And I was so right there. She was just going to get me right. So, but what I didn't know was I was just going into therapy thinking, I don't know what's wrong. It can't be that bad. Like I had quit one job, I had started another job, and I was still in a space where it's like, oh, something's not right. Like I'm waking up every day. And, I had got to a point in my life where I thought I did everything right. Like I had came from a very sheltered home. I went to Catholic school, kindergarten through 8th grade. I went to a magnet public school in Philadelphia, and I went to school. I did everything that my family had told me was the right thing to do. I didn't have any children. I went to school, I finished school. So I had got to a point where I'm like, oh, okay. I'm good, I'm straight. And then I woke up one day and I hated everything. I hated my job. I hated the person that I was with. I just hated the life. Like I just wasn't happy. So in that, it was like, wait a second, something's not right. I'm supposed to be happy. I did everything right. I have a master's of science from Johns Hopkins. I have a job. I make good money. This is supposed to be it for me. And it wasn't. Like I was really suffering. And what I didn't know, I was suffering in ways that I hadn't even known. And so my first intake was Samantha. I sat in, I was all cute. I came in, hey, no notebook, no pen, no nothing. Just like, oh yeah, what's this? Therapy. Okay, cool. And so we sat and we talked for 2 hours. And I remember vividly this conversation. I was like, I don't know. I just know how to be irritated. Like I just know people get on my nerves. And she was like, what does that mean? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, so what I hear you saying is you have a limited emotional vocabulary. And I'm like, huh? Limited emotional vocabulary? Huh? And so then we had another session. She was talking to me about thoughts and feelings. And I immediately jumped to the relationship that I was in at that point. And I was like, I think keep playing with me. And she was like, so you feel confused? And I'm like, huh? And she shows me this feelings wheel with all of these words on it: confused, embarrassed, like when your needs are met, when your needs are not met. And I'm like, wow. Like all of this time I've been feeling these ways and I haven't been able to articulate it because I don't even have the language to. And I'm an educator, so I'm in a role where I'm taking on the emotions of little people. And they're like hysterical and they're coming to me, Ms. Holmes, and I'm like, I don't want to hear it. We got work to do. So that mentality of regardless of how I'm feeling, I still have work to do. And I was imparting that on the children that I was teaching because that's what I was imparting on myself. And I didn't even realize the deficit in that. And so that going to therapy was really monumental in my journey of myself. Like it taught me so much just about my own thoughts and my own feelings and the person that I was and how I was showing up for my children. And so when I went to therapy, I had already resigned from the job that I had. I had sat down with my principal at my current school. I was teaching second grade at the time. I didn't even finish the year. I was halfway through, and I told her I wasn't okay. I resigned, and that was that. So I went to therapy, like, I resigned from my job. She was like, "Do you have a plan?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I don't have a plan. I don't know what's happening." So long story short, I ultimately had found out that I was battling depression. And I was also, what I learned, that the relationship that I was in at the time was very abusive. It hadn't become physically abusive yet. It was very much emotional and mental. When I was on my way to relocate back to Philly for a while, I had like very traumatic ending to my then relationship. It was like the burner house finally fell. I was held hostage in my apartment. I was like physically abused. It was just like a lot. And so I just knew I had to get home. Like all while that was happening and I was being told that I wouldn't go home and I wouldn't get out and all of these things, I just knew that I had to get home, because at that point it was rock bottom for me. So I went home and I went into isolation, and it was in that it was very painful. And I had to like really face not even the fact of what the person that I trusted had done to me, but what I had done to myself. That the relationship and the stress and the depression was a byproduct of me not loving myself, me not taking care of myself, and also me not admitting to myself that I wasn't okay. So I had to bring myself into a space to tell myself I'm not okay, and that is okay, and making that a normal conversation for myself. And then in that, I was able to bring it to my family and bring it to my friends, who like really showed up for me, because I left DC with nothing, not even a peace of mind. And it was so crazy because when I had left 2 years prior, I felt like I was on top of the world, like, oh, I'm leaving. And so it was just like the opposite side of the coin. I had completely nothing. It was rock bottom. I couldn't sleep. And it's like people see me now, like on this call and doing the things that I'm doing in my community. But there were a lot of nights where I did not sleep, where I did not eat, where I was just battling so many demons within myself just to make it through the day. And I wore a smile and I made it look good because, you know, as a young professional woman educator, I'm not allowed, at that time in my life, I felt like I wasn't allowed to look like what I was going through. I wasn't allowed to show that. I wasn't allowed to show the pain that I was carrying within myself. And so I had to let that go. And I started to be like, this is what happened to me. And then I became that in my community. Now people are like coming to me for things because I decided to be vulnerable and share that. So people now look at me like, wow, that can happen to her. Like this person, like people who have known me my whole life are like, what? And so that has been my journey, which has gotten me here on this call. And I can say that if I didn't decide to embark on this journey, like completely left field from what people in my family have done, completely left field from what my friends have done, I probably wouldn't be on this call, because I would have been somewhere thinking that it's not okay. Like, I'm not okay, but I can't let nobody know I'm not okay. So I would have been faking it. And so that's, in short, how I've gotten here, my journey to wellness. And I will pass it to Ryan now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Shadeen, and I'll be circling back, and just thank you for sharing those parts of you, because I know that's a lot. As Shadeen mentioned, and I wasn't sure if she was going to mention it, she's not active in treatment right now, but Shadeen is one of my former clients.
Oh yes, I'm not active. She has kicked me out. She has kicked me out.
She's doing well. But for just to put some context to it, when I met Shadeen, or when we first met, Shadeen didn't even talk. Shadeen, she would go, unless you were somebody in her personal space, you know, a family member or someone very close to her, she wouldn't talk to you. If she went to Target, if she went to a restaurant, you know, she would call me and say, you know, this lady sat next to me, and she just started talking to me. So, you know, this journey, it's interesting. And I'd like to, again, you know, the stories are so great because people just see you today, but people don't know the backstories. And, you know, again, mental health doesn't look like one thing, and you never really know what a person is going through. So just thank you for sharing that, Shadeen. And we're going to move over to Ryan, who I had the pleasure of meeting the other day for the first time. And Ryan, how would you describe your journey to wellness?
I would say that my journey was one that's of many layers. It's not one that you start the journey and then you end up finishing it. By the time you start it, you come to the realization that it's going to take work, and it's going to be something that continues as you continue moving out throughout life. You're never fully cured. what you're doing is basically dealing with what you have coming towards you. You're dealing with the issues that's coming forth. You try to break out your tool set when you're having some of those down moments, some of those issues with anxiety, some of those issues with depression, or even the reoccurrence of dealing with suicidal ideations or the negative self-talks. You deal with a lot of that stuff. In my own personal story, I could probably trace my story back to a singular instance, which a lot of this stuff started for me. And that happened when I was a teenager. Unfortunately, being a Black male, you have the issue where a lot of things is not talked about within the community. Just being Black is one of the things that there's already a stigma of mental illness. My mother, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She would constantly talk to things that I couldn't see. She would see things that I couldn't see. She would talk to things I couldn't hear. She would constantly have these episodes that I never understood as a teenager. She was very abusive, physically abusive. And one day they took me away from my mother because she came to the school and beat me in front of everybody at the school. That was only the start, because once I was actually released back to her out of being in a shelter for, so long, my mother put me out of the house that night. Here I am with no shirt, pants, no shoes. I'm out of the house. I called the only person I knew who to call, which was a teacher. It was a middle school teacher. My teacher decided to take me in, and he decided to help. And I would hope that that would have been the end of the story, but it wasn't, because I ended up enduring 5 years of sexual abuse as a result of that. And I'm around people who didn't know what was going on with me. I would stay out of the house as late as I could. I was always in the library. I was always in every extracurricular activity I could be in. I was in JROTC. I was in the marching band, the concert band, jazz band, the choir, you name it. I was in everything because I did not want to go home. And I didn't know what to do. Here I am. I'm a kid from, a poor family that at one point in time, we were homeless. And we were digging out of the grocery store dumpster just to even get food. And I grew up with these experiences because my mother, she would be in a house and she couldn't stand being in the house because she would constantly hear voices. And so I finally got to the time where it was time for me to graduate from high school. I applied to every college and university that I could. I got into all of them, but I decided to come to Howard University. I left Texas, came to Howard University. I majored in music. I studied vocal performance. I used to do opera. I had a chance to travel all over the world, go places that I never would have had the chance to go had I stayed in Texas. And I thought that being in a new environment, being away from my abuser, was the best place that I could possibly be. And I was going to have any more issues, because while I was back in Texas, I was constantly trying to find ways to kill myself. A lot of my depression, a lot of my self-harming, a lot of my suicidal ideations started back then. And I really wish that at that time, this could have been the end of it. But I continued to deal with depression moving on. I eventually dropped out of college, ended up staying on the street, stayed with a few friends. I was taken in by a couple of alumni while I got back on my feet. And a few years later, I got married. And fast forward, I'm trying to finally get some help for myself. It was at a time where insurance wasn't really covering the treatment for mental health. It was at a time where, if I tried to get that help, it was going to cost a lot of money and I didn't have it. And I couldn't just go check myself in. And so I tried to get into a clinical trial study. I figured I can go into the study. After the study, they helped me out with my issues. And during that time, I also got involved with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I started taking a family-to-family class because nobody explained to me what my mother was going through, because I didn't know what my mother was going through. I just knew that she had her issues. Nobody ever talked about them. Whenever my family discussed them, they discussed them away from the children. And so I didn't know how it was for her to go by day with a mental illness, because I didn't even know that she had a mental illness. So while I'm in this class and I'm listening to them talk about the different type of illnesses and the treatment and the medications, I realized that a lot of stuff that they're going through, that they're talking about, applied to me. While I was doing that class, a few weeks later, I ended up having a mental break myself. And I was hell-bent on dying by suicide. And one of my good friends talked me into checking myself into a hospital, and I did. I would go into the hospital knowing full well that I had a problem that I needed help with. It wasn't an issue of not really trying to get the treatment. I wanted the treatment, but I found myself in the midst of having a breakdown, needing help. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It's a pervasive mood disorder. You have issues with self-image, behavior. You have intense periods of anger, depression, anxiety. Sometimes it can last for a few hours and it can last up to a few days. And this is not something that men typically have. It's something that's very rare in men, but you find a lot in women. And I would go through and I would willingly participate in the treatment. And after I was checked out of the hospital, I had this cocktail of medications that I just couldn't find myself dealing with. I had the antidepressants, the antipsychotics, anti-anxiety. I had sleep medication, medication for mood disorders. I had so much medication that it basically almost turned me into a vegetable. I could not function. Here I am. I've been a software developer for all this time, and I'm just trying to get by day. And I couldn't even wake up until after half the day has already passed through. And so I couldn't function. And so I ended up working with my physician my psychiatrist, and working with my therapist, and I was willingly getting treatment. And it got to the point where I didn't need as much medication, to the point where I didn't need any medication. I found myself a few years later, not even able to get up the stairs, and I'm in the hospital because of pulmonary embolism. And it was one of the first times I thought to myself, I didn't want to die. I had a couple of dozen blood clots in my lung. They're keeping me in the hospital because they're like, if one blood clot passes to your brain, you're dead. And I'm sitting up here talking to my wife like, I don't want to die. I was like, I've had so much that I can do and that I can move forward with that I didn't do all the times I was dealing with depression. And it was at that point where I was just like, let me change something about my life. I started getting involved in NAMI. I went back to school to pursue my education. I'm currently working on my PhD in social psychology right now. I've been doing a lot of these talks as much as possible because I want to be able to go out there, tell people how it is in dealing with a mental illness, because it never goes away. And I wish that there were times where I can look back and say, you know what, I was dealing with that then, but I'm not dealing with it now. But as time goes on, I've constantly been tested with regards to how I'm coping with the death of a son, with a daughter that was in the hospital for 9 months, with a son that was in the hospital for 4 months, with a recent diagnosis with my daughter having autism. It's like there's something constantly always coming that you have to be able to kind of stand strong. People dealing with the mental illness, they're already strong enough as it is because they're trying to deal with something that a lot of people don't have to deal with. And then they're trying to do school, and they're trying to do work, and they're trying to manage a family. They have all this stuff that they're juggling. And then just to pile on more stuff, it makes it very, very difficult. And it makes it very hard to just try to move forward. And the easiest answer in a lot of people's head is to just quit, just to give up. And that's when we have to kind of turn to ourselves and say, no, we can't quit. We can't give up. We have to keep on with our treatment. We have to keep that medication. We have to get up out of the bed in the morning. We have to keep living our life no matter how difficult it becomes. And I can tell you, seriously, it becomes difficult to the point where even as a man, I may sit and cry in the shower because I don't want to go to work, because there's so much on me. There's so much of a weight that's on me that this is not how I just want to continue on. But you're always going to constantly be tested because the illness never goes away. You're just going to have to keep finding ways to deal with it. In some cases, it gets easy. In other cases, it continues to get hard. But my journey is basically of one where I'm going through treatment, I'm getting better, and then you get knocked right back down. And then you pick yourself back up, you keep going through treatment, you keep getting better, you keep going through these bouts of remission, just like people go through cancer. Some people, they'll get cured, well, not necessarily cured, their cancer will be in remission, and then a few years later, you find out it comes back. And you have no idea why it came back, and it's the same thing with mental illness.
Thank you, Ryan, for sharing your powerful story. And before I get to the next question, I want to just point out a couple of things that you and Shadeen, or reinforce some points that you and Shadeen made. Your issues don't leave when you move from place to place.
Not at all.
Shadeen moved back home to Philly. You moved from Texas to go to college. And a lot of times people think that, if you just change the venue, it's going to change your circumstance. And that's not how mental health works. And just, piggybacking on what Ryan said, it is a lifelong journey. It does not mean that you're crazy. It just means that every day you have to find the strength to deal with what's in front of you, because it's just real life. And it's about learning how to cope. And I'd like to make the distinction. There's a difference between coping and avoidance. Avoidance is just, similar to, the ostrich that puts the head in the sand. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to know anything about it. But when you're coping through something, you're actually moving through it, and you're moving through it while life is happening around you. You still may have kids, you may have a marriage, you have to go to work. So again, if we go back to the original point, mental health does not look like one thing. It does not mean that you're crazy, and you can function. It doesn't necessarily look like a broken down homeless person, which is what a lot of people think it is. Also, it is not something that you can just shake off, right? A lot of times, especially within children, I caution parents when they say, "Oh, you know what? Your life is so good. You don't have any reason to feel bad. Look at all the things that you have. You shouldn't feel that way." Mental illness should not be confused with being lazy. That's not what that means, or shiftless. You can't just get up and decide, go take a shower and let me just shake it off. So I think we have to really be intentional and mindful about what we say to people. It doesn't mean walk on eggshells, but again, what we're here to do is to debunk the myth, and to provide very concrete examples of what it can look like with two highly functioning individuals, people that you would not think, hey, they're educated, they've gone to some of the best schools. This shouldn't happen to people like them. But, again, that's not the case. So I just wanted to reinforce those points. And thank you for, pointing that out. So my next question is about, you guys talked about and described your journey to wellness. Understanding that there really is a stigma attached to getting help, right? What prompted you to seek the help and say, you know what, I don't care what people think about me? So how did you get there? Because I think that's a real thing for people. And I think that would be helpful for people to understand, like, how did you get to that space of vulnerability where it's like, you know what, this is serious. You know what, my friend group, my peer group, my family group can call me crazy. I don't care. I need to take care of myself first, second, and third. And this is what I'm going to do. So how did you move through that barrier?
So I would say, like I stated before, my background in education with emphasis on social emotional development, I was learning how to identify trauma responses in the children that I was serving in my classroom. So that information I was taking in was just in my brain. At that time in my life, when I was in grad school, when I was teaching in DC, I wasn't applying that information to myself. I was just taking it and looking at it in the classroom. But I had gotten to a space, like I said, I had done everything right. So I started wondering to myself, why am I not happy? Like, why am I not, like, I wasn't eating. I just didn't have the desire to walk my dog. I was like going to work, but barely mentally there. And it was so much going on. And I had some very, very good mentors and friends in my corner through my program. And just that were around me that I was talking to about the things that were happening in my relationship. And I was crying and just sad all the time. And it's like, wait a second. I'm not supposed to feel, not me. My ego at the time was so big. I'm like, not me. I'm not supposed to feel like this. Maybe I should talk to somebody. And before I had got to the point of actually looking for a therapist, I had talked to my mentor, Ms. Pinnock. I love Ms. Pinnock. She has helped me through so much, but I was like, I think I'm going to get a therapist. And she was like, I think you should. But then like 2-3 months went past. And then I was like, you know what? I told my sister, I'm going to find a therapist. And just me identifying in myself, I'm not okay. Why am I not eating? Not sure why I wasn't eating, not sure why it was taking me 2 and 3 weeks to pick my laundry up. I would go outside and look perfectly fine, but then I would come in the house and I would literally just crawl in the bed and everything was a mess. And so I knew then this is something that I don't know what it is, but I need to fix it because I'm not supposed to be going through this, not me. And so that's what got me to calling Samantha. Like, hey, I found you on psychology today and I think I want to go to therapy. I don't know what and so she was asking me all of these questions like, okay, so why do you want to go to therapy and what do you do? And she was getting my background information. I was like, I just think I've been working on myself. I had a trainer, I was losing weight, but now I think it's time for me to take a better look into my emotional. I didn't even know, honestly, what I was asking for. And so then we scheduled my intake. And like I said, I went in there and we sat and we talked. And just in those 2 hours, I was just not even noticing everything that I had bottled up inside of me. Like I was talking about work and I was talking about my mom and I was talking about my sister and I was talking about my relationship. And so I had said all of that. And I remember vividly the last 2 sentences she said to me before I finished, she was like, so you don't feel like you have a voice and you don't feel powerful or you don't have any power. And I was like, no, I'm not saying that. And she was like, are you sure? And I'm looking at her and she's looking at me and I'm like, what in the world? What is this lady? And all the while I have this feelings wheel in my hand with all of these words. So she gave me the feelings wheel and she asked me, how did I feel? And I was like, well, can I feel 2 ways? And she was like, what do you most feel? And I was like, I really don't know. And that was where we ended my first therapy session. And I had just walked away like, I don't know how I feel. And even that just was like, I should know how I feel. Like I teach young children, you be a good friend, you love each other. How you feel today? How was the playground? What happened? And I'm showing up and I don't even know how I feel, which is then I started to understand why I was making certain decisions in my classroom and certain decisions in my life because I was masking how I felt. I didn't even have the vocabulary to say, I feel confused. Not only did I not have the vocabulary, I wasn't even in a space to say I'm not okay because I had put so much pressure on myself as being this person who has always been a go-getter. I've always been, I'm on to the next thing. I graduated undergrad. Okay, I'm going to Johns Hopkins. I'm on to the next thing. I'm teaching. I'm on to the next thing. I had never even given myself time to ask myself, how do I feel and understand if I was okay or not. And then once I started to feel like I wasn't okay, I didn't think that was okay. But I had so many people in my corner who were telling me, you're young, like you have nothing, like you have so much going for yourself and you can do whatever you want. I remember vividly at the school I was teaching at, this other second grade teacher, I had a dry erase board in my classroom with nothing on it except one magnet. And I had shared with her like vulnerable things about what was happening in my relationship. I was getting stalked and it was just so much going on. It was just so much. I could sit here all day and talk about all of the traumatic things, but So it was one magnet on my dry erase board, nothing else. And she said, you're this magnet. You have nothing holding you anywhere. You create the life that you want. You create your happiness. You create what that looks like. And she had planted that seed like, I can walk away from all of this. For me, not for my mom, not for my sister, not for my family, not for my friends, not for my students. This is not serving me anymore. And so that got me to letting go of all that wasn't serving me and walking into therapy and being like, something's not right. And I will do whatever I need to do to make sure that I can show up every day. Because I work too hard and I got too many student loans. I got too much stuff on my back to wake up every day and hate what I do. Like when I resigned from my job, I didn't take anything from my classroom because I was like, I'm never teaching again. I hate this. I hate everything about this. I hate it. I hate everything. And so when I walked into therapy, it was like, I don't know what I need to do, but I'm willing to do it. And that turned into me finding out I was dealing with depression. My therapist had diagnosed me with major depressive disorder, which resulted in my changes in appetite, my lack of sleeping. And so I was getting all of this information. And me, I love learning new stuff. So this is new stuff about me. Oh wow, okay. What do we gotta do? What do I gotta do? I gotta face these demons. I gotta take this risk. I gotta walk this whole separate path that nobody in my family has walked. And that's on me. Okay, perfect. Let's do it. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do it because I don't deserve to feel like this. Nobody deserves to feel like this. And so now that I'm still walking on this journey, that was only almost 2 years ago. So this is still new to me. Every day I'm waking up like I'm grateful. Like I don't care what happens today, but I'm grateful that my 10 toes have hit this ground. And I know that the moves that I make in my life will make changes in the life of my family, in the life of the students that I serve, in the life of the families that see me. So I will do whatever I have to do to show up for myself and to show up for the people who are looking at me. And in order for me to do that, I have to take care of myself. I have to know like strategies. I have to know the strategies that I learned in therapy, journaling, taking mental health days, even what I put in my body, even the people that I keep around me, and understanding that if it doesn't serve me, I have to let it go. And if I didn't go to therapy and expand my knowledge in that, I would never be able to be there in my community and for people to trust me. So just me knowing I need to be okay so that I can do the work that I've decided that I'm going to do, that's what ultimately got me into walking into that office like, I'm not okay, and I won't say it, and we gonna fix it, and that's gonna be that.
Thank you, Shadeen. Ryan, how about you? What was that thing, that moment that you looked around and said, you know what, because it sounds like, you were doing different things, right? But there was that one thing that said, you know what, I have to tell somebody, I have to get help because I can't do this by myself. And that really is what therapy is about, looking yourself in the mirror, but also saying, I'm seeking out someone to help me, sort through some stuff and support this journey. So how did you get there?
I think it started with me initially trying to seek help to deal with the trauma that I dealt with from my teacher. I knew that I was dealing with depression. I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know what to call it at the time. I had a lot of negative coping skills. I used to cut quite a bit. At one point in time, and on up to maybe about, I'm guessing about 6 or 7 years ago, I probably had about 13, 14 piercings. And so that was just kind of my way. The piercings was my way to deal with stop cutting. The cutting was my way to deal with the feelings that I had from the situation that I was dealing with growing up, from the sexual abuse. And so I would initially seek out therapists. I didn't have the money for it because therapy is quite expensive. I was a contractor at the time because I was doing quite a bit of contracting with the government, didn't have benefits. So I would go to like Georgetown, and they would have their, students and residents, and I would go to one of them. They had it on a sliding scale, which you have to pay. And I first started seeing somebody at Georgetown. And after my therapist graduated, I didn't see him anymore. And so it took me a while before I found another one. But he kind of led me in the direction of, hey, you're dealing with all this stuff that you have bottled up, and you're dealing with all of these issues. Have you thought about that that is actually leading to other issues? And so me initially trying to get help for depression really kind of snowballed into something else. I was initially starting off with this one thing, it went over to this other thing. Then I got distracted and started trying to figure out how it is that I can, understand my mother, only to find out that I was understanding myself a bit better and what I was dealing with. And so I knew that I had some type of issue. I knew that I had some type of problem. I didn't have the education, the knowledge, or the understanding to really know what I was dealing with and how it affected me. And so getting that initial help and trying to get that foot in the door was just a start. Like I said, I didn't really reject it. I embraced it, open arms. I went and got the help. I did the treatments. I was an active participant in the treatments because I didn't want to get worse. I wanted to get better. I already knew what was affecting me, that I had my days where I was at work and I didn't feel like dealing with anybody. I'll be in a dark room on my laptop doing my work, or I'll be up under my desk. I didn't think anything was wrong with it, but everybody else is looking at me like, what's wrong with him? But I couldn't understand what my problem was. And it took time in talking to a therapist to really understand what was going on with me and why is it that I was functioning somewhat abnormally from everybody else. And so getting that help, at least starting that conversation with a therapist and going from therapist to therapist kind of helped me understand myself a bit better. But actually getting that diagnosis was the thing that really set me on that journey forward to actually getting to the point of wellness.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of things before I get to my next question. You make a point, a very valid point. Coping skills are not just positive. Coping skills can be negative. Again, the term coping is you're moving through a situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it in a healthy way. That's where we talk about the smoking, the high risk behaviors. That's where suicidal ideation can come in, or cutting. Cutting is not necessarily that you want to die, it's just you just want to feel, right? So coping is not always, we hope through therapy. The point is, if you're, especially if you're in a space where you're engaging in negative coping mechanisms, that you can get some support to start to think about some positive cognitions and reasons to live, and positive coping skills. Also, just a buzzword, being an active participant in your treatment. I think that people have the impression sometimes that you come to therapy and the therapist is supposed to do all the talking or do all the work. And so what I tell people is, if I'm doing all the work, then that's a problem. And there is, I think therapists have to do a really good job of calling people out and saying, hey, are you really ready for this? Because that it can only work if the person shows up for him or herself. And I'd like for you guys to speak to that in a few minutes. And the last point I'll make is about diagnosis. I'll keep it real in saying that diagnosis is definitely Eurocentric, right? It is a Eurocentric model. However, the way I like to explain it to people, it's just a baseline. So if that is a fear that you have coming to therapy, that, oh, I'm going to have this diagnosis and I'm crazy. And, a lot of times I'll get questions about, is it going to be on my work record, or my government clearance? It's no to all of that, right? No one can call a therapist and ask about your personal business, right? A lot of times I'll say to people, you might want to be in therapy so that you don't have issues in the workplace, right? So instead of worrying about, clearance, worry about getting well, right? So it's just a baseline. It's not a scarlet letter. And diagnosis can evolve. It can change. But it does help. And it's also for insurance purposes. I think somebody said that on here, but yeah, you do need it for insurance purposes, but it does not mean that something is wrong with you. There is something wrong, but it's not, again, it's not a scarlet letter. It is not who you are. It's a framework that we use to sort things out. That's how I like to explain it to people. So on those points, I'd like for Ryan and Shajeen to just talk about what did you look for in a therapist, and what are some of the things that people should consider when they're seeking out treatment? Because I think that might be very helpful for people.
Yeah, when I decided that I wanted to find a therapist, I just knew that I wanted a Black therapist, like an African American woman therapist. Like that was where I started. Like I literally text my sister, like, I want a Black woman therapist. And she helped me. She Googled and she sent me Samantha's picture and was like, she looked like she don't play. Like literally that's what my sister said. And I was like, I'm gonna call her tomorrow. I'm gonna find out. And she literally did not play ever. And so that was where I started. Like I just wanted somebody who looked like me, who I could relate to, who could understand maybe where I was coming from. That was that. And so once we developed our relationship, me and Samantha, she would talk about, like, I support my clients. I'm ride or die for my clients as long as my clients show up or ride or die for themselves. I'm not working harder than you, right? And then some of the lowest points of my life, she showed up. She showed up for me when I couldn't show up for myself. She and going through therapy, that showed me the model of a healthy relationship. It was my first model of a healthy relationship, her and I. We respected each other's boundaries. We had boundaries. She had boundaries before I even knew that they were boundaries. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not like when we would talk about, privacy and therapy. And to this, I was in therapy for maybe like a year before she tried to kick me out. And then I got like an extra 2 months. But I swear I never even told anybody her name. I'm just like, my therapist. Because it was like our like relationship, it was like top secret spy stuff almost, like she's my therapist, right? So it was like the friendship, I would say, that we created, and how she showed up for me when I couldn't show up for myself. And she was like, Shadeen, like, this is what's going on. Are you okay with this? She never just threw anything on me unless I needed it. Because sometimes she really did drag me, and I would be sitting here like, who is she? Hold up, okay, I'm gonna just relax. Because it was like I had never received that from somebody, like somebody really holding me accountable for my own behaviors and telling me like what I did. She never made therapy about anybody but me. Even when it hurt, even when she was like, you're not a nice person. You're not a nice person. You do, like, this is what's happening. This is what you settle for. Is that all that you worth? Like, she talked to me like I would talk to my girlfriends. And once I got to a space where I was able to receive that, I knew that it wasn't disrespect. I knew it had no malicious intent. I knew she wanted what was best for me, and that was what I needed. And in that, I was like, I learned what that relationship was like. And I think so many times, like, people, I would say, especially Black and brown people, think therapy like this long chair where you lay and you look at the ceiling and like it's notes and it's just this person calling you crazy. Never once did she call me crazy, but she did hold me accountable. And that in relationships is something that Black and brown people don't get, because you could go talk to your girlfriends and they're like, girl, he crazy, or you just need to leave that job, but they won't never tell you that's your part. They won't never tell you the part that you're doing. They won't never tell you like you could have handled that different, or that wasn't okay. They'll never hold you accountable. But in therapy, I learned that part, and I respected that, and I allowed that to move me through my journey. It was never personal. She never like was attacking me. And if we were having a tough conversation, she would say that I'm not attacking, but this is just what it is. She respected me as a person, and in turn, I was able to respect her, and we respected each other. And I think that is another reason why therapy is super monumental, because it teaches you the value of a good, healthy relationship. Not a perfect relationship, but a healthy one where you are valued and you value the other person. And I think once, as Black and brown people, once we get away from that stigma of therapy, this person is going to tell me I'm crazy. You might be. Receive it. Not crazy in the sense of like negative, but you really might be. But something really might be not. You really might not be okay. And that's the person who's objective. Like when you walk into therapy, that person is objective. They don't know anything about you other than what you're bringing. And so that objectiveness creates a healthy relationship. They don't know about your mom and your dad unless you tell them. They only know what you share. And so you go from that space. Therapy is about taking you from how you're showing up right now and how that person is showing up right now and moving forward. And that's it. It's very objective. It's not emotional. Well, it is emotional, but it's not like, you know what I mean? It's not like,
it's not
personal. Yeah, it's not personal. It's emotional, but it's never personal. And everything is for your best good. So I think that is where people should start. Like, therapy is not me going to somebody to tell me I'm crazy, but therapy is me showing up for myself with somebody who's going to hold me accountable to that every single time I show up. Whether it's telehealth or going into the office, I'm showing up for myself. And this person, man, woman, who, Black, white, whoever, whatever you decide, is going, or should, because every therapeutic experience is different. But that person that you're going to should hold you accountable. And that's what you're showing. That's for me what I showed up in therapy for. I needed somebody to push me. I was used to pushing myself, but this was different. So therapy is different. It's about your brain. It's about pushing your brain, stretching your brain with a person who is going to hold you accountable to that every single time you show up. And if you're not going to show up, then you're doing yourself a disservice in the world, because you're not showing up for yourself. And so that's just how the cookie gonna crumble. So.
How about you, Ryan? What do you think? Thank you, Shadeen.
I can actually say I've fired quite a few therapists and psychiatrists over the years. And it's mostly been because we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. Sometimes it was just personal differences or not understanding basically the background that I come from. I remember one particular therapist, it was a white therapist I was seeing. He was older, and I just felt like he didn't understand me. And so that made me uncomfortable with him. So I wasn't comfortable with going to him. And so I just stopped showing up to therapy one day. And I'm just kind of looking at things just like, what is that I need most? I need somebody who understands me, who understands where I'm coming from, pretty much understands how I grew up. You know, even when I was looking for a therapist for my teenage daughter, she was diagnosed with ADHD, major depressive disorder, and anxiety. And she went to several therapists and she never spoke to them. And then when I would talk to her, she was just like, I don't like them. I was just like, what is it that you don't like about it? I don't know. I just don't like them. I don't want to go there. She's a teenager and she knows that she's going to these people that she doesn't want to see them because they don't understand her. They're talking to her about one thing and giving her advice about another thing. She's a young Muslim woman. And so they're telling her, you know, one therapist like, oh, why don't you look up to such and such celebrity? And she was just, that's not my lifestyle. That's not who I am. And so I think part of it is really finding somebody that understands who you are and understands your background and where you're coming from. Because I think the best therapist I had was actually a Black woman. And I stayed with her for years. And I was kind of salty when, you know, she had, no, I ended up having to move across state lines for work. And when it came down to it, it's like I got most of the help that I needed from her because she knew where I was coming from. She knew, you know, the background, and she could talk to me as if she understood me. Whereas everybody else, they didn't. Some people, they would speak to me and they would be apprehensive about asking certain things. Whereas with the other person, with the therapist I had, she would just come out and say what she needed to say, regardless of how I felt about it, whether I liked it or not, and whether I was, you know, I was accepting of it. She would say what she needed to say, and I would just have to deal with it. And I think her forcing me to deal with things was the best thing that possibly happened to me, because that was a catalyst for me getting myself together and moving forward with my life in the way that I should have.
Thank you both. What I'm taking away is that it's about fit. And it may take you a couple of times. You know, I always encourage people to, the same way your therapist might be interviewing, or a prospective therapist might interview you, you should interview them. You know, you should ask them about their treatment approach, you know, the intervention. And just for, you know, awareness, what that means is every therapist has their way of treating the problem, right? So that's what's called the intervention. So if you go to the doctor, just using that as an example, and the doctor says, oh, you know, you have bronchitis, take some antibiotics, or you have a fever, take some Tylenol. That's how they treat the problem. So every therapist has a different way that they treat the problem. You hope that whatever intervention that they apply, and I don't think that there's a one size fit all. You would hope that it's just evidence-based, meaning that they have looked at the research, they have looked at the data, and they said that, you know what, based on this symptoms, based on, hey, this person has PTSD, or this person has depression, or this person has anxiety, this is what has been known to work. And those are things that you should ask a therapist. It should really be an interview. I don't allow people to come in my office before we have a phone conversation, because it really is about fit, and it really is about chemistry. And it really is a space where the therapist is really, aside from holding you accountable and being objective, but they're just holding space. And so if a person is going to come and put their life story on the line, you know, and just put it out there, or if you have that expectation, you have a right to know how the therapist is showing up. So, you know, oftentimes I tell people, make sure you're interviewing. What is your treatment approach? Why do you have that treatment approach? And they may be able to, they might apply different treatment approaches. I think that that's good too, because, you know, we're not monolithic. People are not one dimensional. But it's a conversation. It's about fit. And sometimes you may not get it the first time, you know, you might not get it right the first time, but I always encourage people to keep trying. And I think eventually people will land. But most importantly, to Ryan's point and to Shadine's point, it doesn't matter what therapist you seek out. If you're not willing to show up in the room and do the work, then it's never going to be successful. It's not possible, because you're the one providing the information. And so if you're saying things that are not true, then you're only lying to yourself. The therapist doesn't lose either way. You're only having a conversation with yourself. So with that being said, Are you guys able to offer suggestions for how we can normalize mental health and treatment in our communities in general, and in particular, Black and Brown communities?
Just by having conversations like these. Like I show up in my circles every day like this on my social media platforms to my children. I'm having these conversations with my family because, and me holding myself accountable, I have to hold the people who are around me accountable too for certain things. And I just think having these conversations about mental health and just in my space, in my world, me being vulnerable about all that I have gone through, from domestic violence to healing and just being a professional and looking a certain way. I was living a life where it just had to look good. I had to look a certain way. Things had to appear a certain way. And so by me speaking out on my journey and being living, walking proof of that, people can see it and they want to know, like, therapy did that? Like, what your therapist do? And I'm like, honestly, my therapist don't really do nothing. She just kind of listen and take notes and like she'll say something every now and then I'm like mind blown, like, huh? Like, and then I go out into the world and I do the work. So by me doing the work and people seeing me do the work, especially people who have seen me along my journey from high school to college to now this, like this is what I'm walking in, this life that I'm walking in now, and they like, Miss Holmes, Shadeen, like what happened? Even my family, like it becomes infectious just because they see it and it's not normal. It's not something that's normalized. So by me normalizing self-care and normalizing talking about my days when I'm not okay and normalizing, like I took a mental health day. Like I wasn't okay this morning. I took the morning, or I'm talking to my friends about integrity and I do words of the month. Like my word of the month this month is love. Before it was vulnerability, but before that it was integrity. So introducing these things that I've learned into the communities that I've been in for all my life, and now creating a difference and understanding that the way that I show up is powerful because I'm making changes in my community. Right here where it started, right here where everything that I have in my mind, which got me to rock bottom, I've now gotten back up and I'm doing the work and you see it. And one thing that the man that told me in therapy, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Whether it's just, it creates like a seed, it's just a planted seed. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So if you want to know, ask the questions. But if you want to stay complacent and you want to make the choice of suffering and whatever you're suffering in and making it known, then you do that. But you see what doing the work for me looks like, for my family, what that looks like. Nobody connected to me can now settle for something because I've broken so many things. Even my friends, I have my friends who come to me and I'm like, you yourself, I can't, whatever is destined for you is destined for you. But there are certain things that you don't have to go through because I did it for you already. I've done that for you. So this is now, I've done it. So you make choices now. But I think just normalizing it and doing the work and being a pillar in my community, I'm now making it normal for people who look like me, who come from places like me. For my children, I have conversations about confidence and integrity and your feelings with 5-year-olds. And they like, Miss Holmes, confidence? And I'm like, perseverance and integrity too. Yep, all that. Yep. And they're 5, because imagine if I would have had those conversations, if somebody would have had those conversations with me when I was 5. It may have completely altered where I ended up. Where I ended up where I was supposed to be by divine, the guidance. But 5-year-olds now are talking about confidence and they're talking to their parents and just making it normal and not observing me to be like, I'm not okay today. I'm staying in the house, y'all. Don't call me because I don't got nothing to do with none of that. I am in the house where I'm like, hello. But yeah, it's just normal. Like it's showing up from that space and making it normal and making it okay to not be okay. Creates that space.
Thank you. How about you, Ryan?
I think I'm in one of those unique positions where I feel that it's a responsibility upon myself. I have this belief in my community where either you have a responsibility that's communal, that the community uptakes, or you have a responsibility amongst yourself that you're the person that's able to do it, that you uptake. I'm in a space where the majority of the people that I do my presentations with are all women. And there's basically nobody I've seen that's basically a man that's talking about what they've gone through with their mental health journey. And so I use my platform to speak about those issues. And then I get feedback from other people that's either on my page or people I've done at, a company or some type of function or something. And they're reaching out to me and saying, hey, I have this problem. There was a young man, I was talking about mental health and mental illness on Facebook and my journey and what I was dealing with. And he wrote me privately telling me about the issues that he was dealing with with his marriage. And with him getting a diagnosis and him not being on this medication. I would go and talk about other things. And I have a young kid that's calling me up now because he's having a hard time discussing with his parents about why he needs to take medication for a mental illness. And it's not something that's just about him not being religious enough. We have these baked in ideas within the Black community as it is, that when I was a kid, they were telling my mother that she was possessed, and they would try to do an exorcism on her at the little church that was right across the street from us. And they would tell her that, you know, she's not praying enough, she's not attending church enough. And that had a bearing on me because it's not only in that community. It wasn't just down south that they're doing this. They're doing this in Ghana. They're doing this in Nigeria. They're doing this all over the world. There are papers on this stuff. And it's the same thing. We try to bring it back to religiosity, but we're not actually bringing it back to the point of, hey, you have some problems that you're dealing with. Let's try to understand those problems and let's try to, you know, help you cope and help you move forward. But we're not getting that. And mainly it's because mental health and mental illness, these aren't things that's regularly talked about in the community. When we get to the point of regularly talking about it in the community, and we get people to the point of really understanding what's going on, and not everybody is the same, and not everybody is just their diagnosis. You are not your diagnosis. You are not a schizophrenic. You are not bipolar. You're a person that's dealing with schizophrenia. You're a person that's dealing with bipolar disorder. We have to learn how to put people first before what somebody's calling the illness, because the illness is nothing but a set of symptoms that doctors are using to try to treat you, and nothing more than that. But once we get to that point and understanding that, yes, people are human, they're dealing with things, their brains might be wired a little bit differently. They may have dealt with some type of trauma in their past that has affected them. Whether you're a mother and dealing with childbirth and postpartum depression, or whether you've dealt with some type of abuse and you're dealing with PTSD, people don't necessarily have a choice over what they end up being affected with. We treat people who deal with a physical illness with much more empathy than we do people with the mental illness. Because look at it, we have television, we have movies, we have everything that's telling us how people with a mental illness look like. But what about Dr. John Nash from A Beautiful Mind? You look at his story, he was still able to hold down a job. Yes, he had problems, he needed treatment, he was still able to move forward. You look at somebody like Chris Evans, who deals with social anxiety. You look at Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool, who deals with anxiety. You have Kendrick Lamar, who deal with depression and suicidal ideation. You have all these people that's in these high positions that have successful careers, and they're still dealing with their illness, but we haven't normalized talking about it yet. Because back at home, they're talking about your crazy Uncle Joe that's walking up and down the street talking to himself, or the man that has the headphones on all the time with a CD player that's always listening to something because he can't tune out the voices. We can normalize talking about these people, and we're talking bad about them, but we can't normalize being empathetic to them and trying to treat them with some type of sympathy. What is it that's so difficult about in our communities, Black and brown communities, that we can't start treating people with a little bit more compassion? Because yes, you can have an illness and you can move forward and have a successful career, but I think people really need to see that. They need to understand that, yes, I may be dealing with depression, I may be dealing with anxiety, I may be dealing with psychosis, but guess what? I can still have a normal life. And just because you don't necessarily see what I'm dealing with doesn't necessarily mean I'm not dealing with anything. Because I can tell you after COVID, everybody is dealing with something. And they're talking about 1 out of 3 people is dealing with some type of depression from being locked up in the house for the past year. I can assure you, everybody is dealing with something at some point in time. And I think it's going to take some radical empathy. I think it's going to take some compassion. And I definitely think it's going to take some more conversations just like this to happen so that people really understand what's going on, why it's going on, because you are not immune to that 1 in 4 that's probably going to go through some type of mental health crisis throughout the year. You may just be that person that may lose a grandmother or may lose a loved one, and you're just getting hit hard. Because I can tell you, I've been hit hard over the past year just from losing people to COVID, just from losing classmates. I was at Howard University with Chad in fine arts, and he was a friend of everybody that was around me. And then to find out he passed away, that hurt, and that hurt hard. And we don't normalize really kind of dealing with that trauma. So when are we going to normalize that? We have to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, it's not going to become normal.
No, I appreciate that. I think I often say you can't address something if you don't think it exists. So you have to talk about it, in particular Black and Brown communities. And I think we like to wear the banner of resilience, but having a mental health issue and, or I like to say the push through mentality, it doesn't mean that you're not resilient. You know, one doesn't impact the other. You can still be resilient and deal with life stressors. You know, it's just about owning it. But I think those are also generational comments that we have to break, if you will, because we earn it. So, oh, just keep pushing through. Oh, you'll be all right. Just, you know how we do. We just keep moving forward. And it's so dangerous. And it's embedded in our psyche that if I do anything other, then something's wrong with me. And that's when we show up angry, and we don't even know, we're not even realizing how we're showing up in the world. And I think that's what mental health is about, having that look in the mirror and understanding that my human interaction, my social interaction, those transactions can really impact me and how I show up in the world, how I move about the world. And if we're not aware, that's where it becomes detrimental. So those are the last of my questions. I don't know, Wendy and Freddie, did we go over? I'm so sorry. It was such a great conversation.
Thank you. This was such a wonderful conversation. And thank you, Samantha. Thank you to our panelists for being so vulnerable and transparent. And I'm echoing some of the comments that are in the chat. People are so grateful and thankful to you for just sharing your journey. And we're going to hold off for questions with them right now and wait to the end of, if there's time at the end. If not, we will share you all's information when we do a follow-up email to all of our guests. So yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, I just can't say enough adjectives, but just keep coming. Just thank you for the wonderful conversation. We sincerely appreciate it. So next, we're going to have Veronica Proudford. She is a music consultant with 8 years of experience at the intersection of business and entertainment. She earned a bachelor's degree in marketing at the University of Maryland, where she was also initiated into the Kappa Phi chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Throughout her career, Veronica has helped high-profile clients like Live Nation, the Grammys, and the Universal Music Group better engage their audiences. Hold tight, because you are in for a treat. Let's welcome Soror Veronica.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Okay, so thank you so much for that introduction. Today, I will be talking about creating playlists as a form of self-care.
Doesn't look like the speaker's slides have displayed yet. Are they coming?
There we go. Okay. So just a little more background on me. I'm a music consultant with a few areas of expertise, including marketing, event production, and my favorite, which is music curation. That is strategic playlisting for brands, events, and communities. So I've made a lot of music mixes, which is always fun. Next slide, please. So music can be an incredibly impactful tool for self-care, as the panel highlighted many, many times, which is so important. we have to acknowledge and honor our feelings and find really healthy and positive coping mechanisms. I know that especially during COVID and being in quarantine, a lot of us have struggled perhaps with repressing emotions, but eventually they do kind of manifest in certain ways. So here is an emotions map. On the two axes, we have high arousal or high energy versus low energy, and then negative versus positive valence, which is mood. And next slide, please. This creates 4 quadrants, which I've named stress, bliss, gloom, and calm. And let's see. So let's say you are, could you go back one? There we go. So let's say you're feeling down. Once you've made your playlists, you want to listen to the gloom playlist and set a certain amount of time. I like to give myself, 10 or 15 minutes to really feel sad, feel through that emotion, journal while you're doing that, and then draw kind of an imaginary line to the opposite positive emotion, which in this case is bliss. So you'll listen to that playlist to lift your energy and your mood. You want to switch from, a low energy negative place to a higher energy place and more positive. And then next slide, please. And then the same thing goes for stress, but in the opposite direction. Listen to that like angry music, that high energy, negative music to get that out of your system, and then transition to calm to regain a sense of calm. So, scream if you need to into a pillow, cry, whatever you got to do to feel through those emotions and really release them. And if you're already in a great place and you're calm or you're feeling blissful, just listen to that playlist to stay there. And what I love about these is there's real healing in the act of creating the playlist as well as actually listening to it. I found that being able to focus on one task at a time and really be mindful and present in the moment is its own form of meditation. You can create an experience or like a weekly or monthly ritual around it. So say spending an evening, lighting a candle, making some food, doing it alone or with a loved one, and work on this playlist. It's a really relaxing activity to take your mind off what's going on in the outside world, especially. And please. So now we're gonna have some time to create the playlists. If you have, actually, could you go back one slide? Okay, that's fine. So if you have an Apple Music or Spotify account, you can go ahead and log into those, or just grab a piece of paper. I also have like a vinyl collection that I like to listen to, or CDs, like anything that'll help you make these playlists. And then come up with some songs for either one of them. You want to do a deep dive in, or a couple songs for each of them, whatever is speaking to you right now. And if you go to the next slide, I have some examples of what I'm currently listening to on my website if you want to check those out also, just to give you some more examples. But yeah, I guess we'll have, a few minutes to just work on those.
Great. So yes, we'll take a little bit of a pause here. And if, as Veronica said, if you want to open up one of your apps or just maybe take some notes of what's here, get some ideas flowing, we'll take just a few minutes to give you a minute to work on your playlist. If you have a question about the playlist specifically that you want to ask Veronica, you can put it in the chat. So we're going to focus at this moment just maybe on a question about the playlist. If you have that, you can put that in the chat. So there's a question about, there's a question about increasing the size of the screen. I don't know if that's possible, but we will provide the
Source.
slides.
Hi. I can, if you hover over, there's two lines between the speakers panel and the screen that shows the list. If you hover over it, you can highlight, you can click and you can drag it, and you can, if you drag it to the right, depending on how your screen is set up, it will blow up that screen.
Thank you for that tip.
And I see some questions coming in the chat. For my vinyl playlist, I just come up with the album, like the physical albums that I have in my collection to come up with those playlists. So I don't have them anywhere on my site.
And then there's also a question, it's how long do you allow yourself to stay in the negative emotion / playlist before drawing your line and moving to a more positive emotion?
It really depends on the situation. I think if it's something that I like, a specific problem that I've worked through before, but I'm just kind of like feeling triggered maybe in that moment, I'll give myself like 10-15 minutes. But if it's something I need to really like journal about and work through, then I'll give myself more time. So it just depends on the situation and I guess how healed I am from it. Just kind of listen to yourself, and as you do this, you'll be able to get better.
Great, thank you. So I think we can give this maybe another 30 seconds or so, and then you can work through the rest of your slides.
All right, so that's about it. Could you go to the next slide? So yeah, I mean, I hope that, creating these playlists and listening to them is able to help you change your mood and shift your focus and help you recharge and cope in a really positive way. Thank you again to the planning committee, as well as all of you for attending, and happy playlisting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sora. We have a comment in here that says, this is a great technique music-wise, as it allows you to not just gloss over your emotion, but to acknowledge it and then counterbalance it. Thank you. Thank you. And we will send this playlist, if you didn't get a chance to capture it, we will send her website as well as this playlist in our follow-up message to everyone that participated. So, Wendy.
Thanks so much.
Great. We are almost at 7:30, but I do want to maybe give just a minute or so, a couple minutes for any questions that we might have for any of the panelists. If you have it, if you could drop it into the chat, and we can probably take one or two. And while you're typing that, I do want to point out there are some resources here on the screen that Samantha provided. And so you might want to take a moment to jot down some of those. And again, we will be able to provide, the recording will be available on our website in a few weeks, but also as a follow-up, you'll get an email in the next week or so with the with this information as a resource for you as well.
And also, if you didn't see, Ryan provided two resources as well for therapy, and that will be also included with the information as well, if you weren't able to capture that from the chat. And we have another comment. Music is powerful. It can help you move from sad to happy by starting with upbeat music. And then someone else said, thank you so much for this.
Yeah, this has been an incredible and really powerful presentation. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in. I know that there's a lot that we share as a patient, and we're going to turn it over to Elaine Johnson, who is going to give us some closing comments and also encourage you to complete our survey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening for this profoundly moving discussion on the topic of mental and emotional wellness. I think it was very relatable because you said it best, Mr. Williams, that we all have some degree of brokenness. It's just the extent, I believe, that separates us. Thank you for helping us to see and debunk myths associated with it, eradicating the stigma just by beginning the conversation. We so appreciate it. If everyone would join me in just giving a rousing round of applause to our panel, to Soros Gaborn and Proudford. Thank you so much for sharing. To Ms. Holmes and Mr. Williams, we're so grateful for your transparency, for bringing to life this discussion. We really applaud you for stepping out and sharing with us. We appreciate you so much so. We've heard lots of positive feedback. If you would, please take a moment and jot some of that in our survey. We use this to assess our programming, and having that feedback helps us to put on more programs like this. So if you would pause a moment and do that, we would so appreciate it. Also, we want to bring to your attention some programs and events that we have going forward. If you would advance the slide, please. And they say laughter is the best medicine, right? So let's take that opportunity and laugh. We invite you to come join us for this Red Hot Comedy Show. It's on this Saturday. If Soros would please put those links in the chat so that they would be available for you to register for that. It's open to the public, free. The comedy show, there is a ticket price to that. You see it posted there. But we also have coming up a book club, The Wealth Choice, Secrets of Black Millionaires. The author will be there. That is a free event open to the public. So if you would share both of those events widely, we invite you to visit our website for additional programming and information. And thank you again so much for supporting us this evening for our panel. We appreciate you. Thank you again so much. We look forward to bringing you more kinds of programs like this and look forward to receiving your feedback. Thank you so much, Soros. I will return it to the committee chairs.
Great, thank you, Elaine. And again, we just echo all the appreciation for our panelists this evening, for your vulnerability, for your willingness to share, for your suggestions, for your ideas. One thing that really stood out that we kind of said on our planning call that came out today is that we normalize the issues. We normalize calling crazy Uncle so-and-so. We normalize all those other things, but we need to move toward normalizing, talking about, and really claiming our mental and our emotional well-being and our health, and seeking the help that we need, and not being ashamed of that, but really being bold and taking care of ourselves and being able to support others who are dealing with the same thing. So I will kick it over to Freddie for any closing comments before we say good evening.
Just wanted to say thank you, and I am echoing everything that everyone else has said, and thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We held you a few minutes over, but I hope you were able to get a lot out of it, and thanks again. Enjoy your evening and stay well.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.